So today we're going to get into the 6 lies that addicts and alcoholics tell themselves and others. And keep in mind, there are hundreds of these, but I'm just going to focus on the top 6 that you're probably most familiar with. Because addicts and alcoholics are not only manipulative, but their whole job is to lie even when the truth would suit them better, because that becomes their new language. And as far as it even being a lie, it's even hard to call it that when that is actually their reality. So we're going to go ahead and discuss the 6 lies that addicts and alcoholics tell themselves and others. The first one is them trying to convince you that they can stop using drugs or alcohol whenever they want. If that were true, you wouldn't be watching this and they probably wouldn't be in the position that you're in. People who are true addicts and alcoholics cannot stop just because they want to. If this were true, there would be no treatment centers. We probably would have less need for law enforcement. We probably wouldn't have the problems that we have today in regards to drugs and alcohol. Because there's one thing I've learned, that if somebody is diagnosed as a severe substance use disorder, they have lost the ability of control. They have lost the ability to just stop when things have gotten out of hand. So that goes back to the manipulation of the addict and the alcoholic, where they want to convince you that just give them time and they will stop. The other one, or the second one I should say, is them trying to convince you that they need drugs and alcohol to cope with their problems. The reality is that using drugs or alcohol doesn't take the problems away. It only masks the problems for them at your expense. Because while they're masking their problems with alcohol and drugs, you're having to live the nightmare with them. And what we've learned is the more drugs and alcohol we use, the harder it is for us to stop. And the harder it is to get out of the hole that has been dug. So if they're using drugs and alcohol just to cope with their problems, and they should take that show on the road and do it in and of themselves without the family's resources. The third one is when they try to convince you that they're not like others or like another person. Because an addict and an alcoholic, another way they manipulate others, is to try to convince themselves and others that they're not as bad as the other person. And by doing that, they psychologically justify that they don't need to address the problem. So when you start hearing them say, well, I'm not as bad as this guy, that's just diversion, manipulation, and flipping the script. And it almost makes you think, well, yeah, maybe they're not as bad as that other person, so maybe we still have some time. The fourth one has everything to do with the fact that addiction and alcoholism is not a victimless crime. I know it's been called that by many because it only affects the person using it. That is simply not true. If drugs and alcohol only affected the person using it, it would not be ripping through families and marriages and friends and workplaces and what have you. Addiction is a selfish crime where the person only cares about themselves with utter disregard for anybody else. It rips children from their mothers and fathers. It rips sons and daughters from their parents. It causes job loss. It causes incarceration. It contributes billions and billions of dollars a year for the necessary resources to stop alcohol and drug problems, or at least prevention and law enforcement and courtrooms. For somebody to say that they're only hurting themselves, remember this, your loved one is probably affecting 200 people. Not only their immediate family, but then their immediate family's harmed, and then your attitude changes, and the ripple effect just keeps going. So it is beyond comprehension to call this thing a victimless crime. The fifth one is basically the victim role, where they start to think, I have nothing to live for, I'm never going to amount to anything, and they start to pull on the family's heartstrings, almost as if they're just a victim of circumstances, so I might as well just drink alcohol or use drugs the rest of my life. That simply just isn't true. I mean, people can recover, so to try to convince your family that they're a lost cause and that nothing can be done about their problem and they're just going to drink or drug to the bitter end is not only wrong, but it's also alarming and scary. So when your loved one has gotten to that level, you need to make a call to professionals or even to law enforcement to do a well-being check on them, because that type of talk, although we've never had it turn out in any type of self-harm, you just never know. Because when people get down to that depressive level where they're using that victim mentality as an excuse, you have to take that seriously. The sixth and final lie that addicts and alcoholics use to convince others and themselves to continue using is they honestly believe that they'll never have fun again. They cross this imaginary line of, how will they ever live life on life's terms free of drugs and alcohol? How will they go to sporting events? How will they get through anything? How will they ever be sober? How can I go to Alcoholics or Narcotics Anonymous and be happy like these other people? I remember being at an open speaker meeting one day, and that's a meeting anybody can attend. You don't have to be in recovery. And a young man had said, I cannot comprehend going the rest of my life never using drugs or alcohol again. And this other person, it was their time to share, who had been sober a very long time, he responded and said, I'm glad you said that, young man. I can't comprehend ever having drugs or alcohol back in my life. So I get it. Alcoholics Anonymous always talks about we're not a glum lot. I understand how an addict and an alcoholic could not comprehend never using again, but what they're really saying is I cannot comprehend ever getting through the traumas, the grief, the thoughts, the perception issues that I have that cause me to self-medicate, because there are other solutions. So when it comes to the lies that people tell, those are just the 6 that I wanted to focus on today, but anybody watching this knows that I've only scratched the surface.